journey beyond imposter syndrome. This is where I invite you into a space where high achievers and spiritual leaders converge to redefine success and self-worth. By sharing transformative stories and engaging with thought leaders, this podcast serves as a roadmap for navigating the complexities of imposter syndrome. It's an intimate look into overcoming personal barriers tailored for those who value wisdom, leadership, and intuition in business and life. Join me at the Humble Warrior Podcast with Alani Bankhead. Welcome to the Humble Warrior Podcast. I'm your host, Alani Bankhead. And you guys, I'm so excited and honored today to have English Black on the podcast. English is a physician assistant, and she's been professionally helping people look and feel better about themselves for over 2 decades. She got her start in medicine in 2002 after she graduated from Dean's List at James Madison University, my old stomping grounds. And so thank you so much, English, for being here. I can't wait for my audience to learn from you and what aesthetics can do to help them live their best life and achieve all their kind of craziest dreams. So let's just start with, tell us about English. Who is she?
Hey, Alani, thanks so much for having me today. I'm so excited to be here because this topic is just so near and dear to my heart. As far as this, myself, I grew up in Charlotte back before it was more of a national landmark type of place, more small townish. And I don't know that I ever really knew my purpose, but I knew what I didn't want was to live small, and was also very aware at a young age that we all have this reflection looking back at us that says so much about our worth, and that can either feed a hungry ghost and insecurity, or it can be used to empower us. And a very long, windy road, I have come to find out that my purpose is in helping people feel better by looking better in a way that doesn't feed an insecurity, but in a way that empowers them and sets them up for success.
Oh my gosh, there's so much to dig into. I'm so excited to talk about this topic because we were talking a little bit before we hit record. And one of the things that I find with Humble Warriors is we love a good to-do list, right? So you give us a to-do list, we're going to crush that list. Whatever the mission or the mountain is, we're going to get there. And one thing that I found with this community that we struggle with is anything self-care related, we see as frivolous and
Yes.
it's not necessary to accomplishing the mission. But I personally, on my journey, had to discover that, for me, my outsides reflect my insides. So
Absolutely.
I like when I was at my worst, right? So I was in the middle of like working crazy hours on human trafficking cases and child sex abuse cases and stuff. And the work was rewarding and meaningful. We were getting a lot done. But honestly, like I really wasn't taking care of my body or my
Mhm.
skin, or like my diet was garbage because I had resorted to emotional eating. And I had to I didn't have an English Black at the time to dig me out of that hole, right? So I'm really honored that you would share some tidbits to help this audience embrace stuff that's outside of the to-do list, right? And so
For
tell
sure.
us a little bit more about what does it mean to you to use aesthetics to achieve the life and career that you want?
Oh, I love this so much because ironically, I, if you had told me when I started my career that I would be in aesthetics, I would have just laughed and laughed and laughed. As a young woman, young girl, and throughout young adulthood, I had bad acne. I had terrible teeth that I needed braces for. And for me, it was just something I made a decision not to look in the mirror for. I'd always been kind of athletic, and exercise has been a way of honestly maintaining sanity. And as a younger woman, I also witnessed my mother, watched her insecurities be taken advantage of by a plastic surgeon who, instead of advocating for her, I don't know what his motive was, but he gave in to what she wanted, which really wasn't in her best interest. She would say she'd do it again, that she thought she had no choice, but she did. There's always options. And I saw that as feeding off of people feeling poorly about themselves to profit. And I wanted nothing to do with that. And also, traditional medical people will say things like, well, it involves risk, so I'm not going to do it. And it kind of poo-poos the skill of actually being able to help people look better so they feel better about themselves. I took a job midway through my career. I've been dabbling in Botox and lasers, but took on a job as a full-time injector, honestly, because I had a newborn at home and it was 2 days a week. It was around the corner. And I was like, maybe they'll let me practice medical derm. But I started seeing CEOs and academics. This is in a pretty elite college town. And these professional women who they were not trying to look 20. They wanted to look better. They felt like they were looked down upon in board meetings and academic meetings. And they wanted to walk in there feeling great about themselves so that they could perform better. And, it's interesting because through these treatments, their own perception about themselves changed, which obviously changes how we interpret other people's perception. It's so much of it is a mindset shift, but it's empowering because we're social creatures. We care about appearances, whether you want to admit that or not. It's how we choose partners. There's all kinds of data about how people present to interviews. We're not going to get the job if we show up slovenly, just like the people that present more tidied and put together will. And this is really just more of an expression of self-care, just like choosing a brand of clothing, just like choosing a style of suit, a brand of car, anything like that. It's a reflection of how we want to show up in the world.
Oh
So
my
if you feel like you
gosh.
look mad all the time or sad all the time, that's such an easy thing to address these days. It's very simple with very low side effects. And when you choose a great injector, you don't look different. You just look, and you don't look like you're trying to look 20. You just look like the best version of you, and you know it. So then you feel better when you're out in the world doing your thing.
Totally, totally. So I am really intrigued by what you said about the CEOs and the academics, that they came into your office really feeling like they were looked down on in meetings, which is something that is very common in this community, right? So when you're experiencing that imposter phenomenon, that idea that you are not as valued or respected because of dot dot dot, and it might be, in my case it was, I'm too small, too female, too brown, and too young looking
Yes.
for the badass jobs that I had. And so I projected that going into all the
Right.
meetings and created the
Yes.
reality in some cases that I didn't want.
Yes.
So let's say, for example, that there's someone listening who's like, I think there's something to this, but I'm not quite sold. So,
Yeah.
what would you say is the difference between someone who uses aesthetics just to like feed that insecurity versus
Mhm.
someone who comes into your office to help them feel empowered and really like who they have always been inside and out?
I'm so glad you asked this question because it's an important nuance, because it is a nuance and you can pick it apart. The idea of feeding an insecurity is that we are chasing things that other people might not see. For example, whenever a patient comes in and they've got a line that I have to put my readers on or magnifiers on to see, the likelihood that I'm going to meet that patient's expectation is low. And on the same note, it's not going to change the way anybody else sees them, because if I have to look that hard, I'm the professional. No one else sees it. I call that the funhouse mirror. The funhouse mirror is what gets us in trouble. If you're young, you might not have seen a funhouse mirror, but they're these wavy mirrors that distort our reflection. And so a figurative uh, funhouse mirror would be one that enhances these minute qualities that really don't have much impact or bearing. And they are primarily focused on external validation. Whereas a patient that is looking to be empowered, they know. They're like, I feel like I look tired. These lines are driving me crazy, or mad, or I feel like I look tired and I'm not quite sure what to do. And then we go through the Rolodex of the ways that would improve a tired look and stratify your list of priorities, what you're most comfortable with starting with. That's coming from a
Okay.
very patient-centered place, and it's not common. And that's how I have built the business I have.
Okay, I love this. So what I heard you say was the insecure patients that chase these aesthetics. It's more of a, I want other people to accept me, right? I want them to look at me and tap me on the shoulder and bring me into whatever it is that I want to be brought into. Unlike the ones who use this tool to empower themselves, say, I think the line you used was like, they come and they say, I feel like I look tired or I look mad.
Mhm.
And the implied statement is, and that's not who I am.
That's right. That you're exactly right. So we're aligning how we feel on the inside with how we look on the outside. So if you're like, I'm energetic, I'm ready to take on the world every day, but every time I look in the mirror, I feel like I look so drawn and tired and sad, and that's not how I feel, and I don't want to feel that way. That's not,
Oh
I
my
don't want to
gosh.
look that way.
Right. And so we have the ability to change our external appearance, right? So, like, I'm wearing a purple top today.
Yep.
I could have worn a button down with a blazer,
Yeah.
right? To create a different look. So, we're just doing that for our skin and our bodies to better reflect our insides as we're going out into the world doing our life purpose. I love this so much. So, out of curiosity, do you have an example of past clients that you've worked with where whether they were an academic or a CEO or whatever it might be, where they came in and they were a skeptic and they did this work with you. And then they came back and they were like, oh my gosh, English, this happened. Or like, what are the types of results that your clients get from
Oh
working with you?
yeah. Yeah, I that's hilarious because it's usually the skeptics that end up being the biggest diehards, you know. And but yeah, I've had patients cry and weep tears of joy when they've seen their before and afters. The one in particular I'm thinking of, this is less professional, but she's a woman in her 30s and dating a man that was a little younger. And she's like, I feel like I look older than him, and I don't want to feel that way. And we did just a little bit of cheek filler, chin filler, and Botox, and she looked 10 years younger. You know, not like she's trying to look 10 years younger. There's a difference. The trying is when the filler is obvious. You know, these results should be undetectable. Nobody should be able to look at you and say, oh, she just got cheek filler, or oh, she just got chin filler. This is like on the down low, and people only know it if you decide to share it. That's a great result. Most people think that aesthetics are superficial when they're not. And we went down that road a little bit, but I did feel that way before. And it really became more about giving to yourself. And if that's something that bothers you, then what of it? And what business is it of anyone else's if that's something that you want to address for yourself? And it doesn't have to be a selfish thing, because if you feel better about yourself, you show up more powerfully in the world. You show up as a happier mother, as a more confident employee, as a more confident CEO, whatever it is. It's so, I'm getting chills talking about it, but it's so much more than just something on the surface. And the people that really get this, it's just like, it's just like a regular exercise routine. You're empowered and you've got your clip going, right?
I am so glad that you said that because the core audience that listens to this podcast is very service oriented. So for them, it's all about giving to others. And right, wrong, or indifferent, most of us are taught through society or through our family systems that you need to be selfless and
Yes.
give like to
Yes.
a fault, right?
Yeah.
And so one of the indicators of imposter syndrome or imposter phenomenon is burnout, right?
Mhm.
And so a lot of times when people come to me, they have this thought, and it's almost like universal, where they're like, I was told that if I was selfless and I gave, that I would be rewarded, and I haven't been
Yeah.
rewarded, and I'm tired and I'm burned out, and I don't know how I got here, and like something's wrong, and I don't know what
Oh,
it is,
yeah.
but like
Yeah.
I'm ready to blow up my whole life, basically, is
Yeah.
where they're at. So the
Yeah.
idea of mentioning it's about giving to yourself is one of the key things that we talk about in my coaching practice. And it's not just about like self-care, like, because back in the
Yeah.
day when self-care first got on the scene, I remember just kind of rolling my eyes and being like,
Yeah.
okay, and I remember I would go to like a yoga class or something and be like, why don't I feel better? I went to a yoga class, I self-cared.
Right.
And so now I know it's a process, right? It's not just a one-time
100%.
thing. And it's just like going to the gym. You can't go one time and expect the results that you want.
That's right.
It's a process. It is being consistent and embodying what you want to be.
Yeah.
But ultimately, when my clients really get into this work, what they realize is they're really great with to-do lists. They will crush any mission that they're given. But the hardest tools that they need to learn how to pick up and those muscle movements in the figurative gym of life that they have to practice
Mm,
are surrender, the self-care of loving yourself first because you can't pour
yeah,
from an empty cup, right?
absolutely.
It's learning how to receive. So another behavior indicator of imposter phenomenon is inability to receive compliments, or if you get an award or promotion or anything, the immediate thought is like, they don't actually know that I'm deeply flawed and I don't deserve this and all this stuff, right? What you're talking about with giving to yourself through aesthetics is just another fantastic tool in the toolbox for people, to where it's not superficial, is what
Mhm.
I'm hearing you say. If this is a tool that you need to utilize, you should use it, because
Yeah.
when you give to yourself, I have found you actually give exponentially more to the communities that you're called to serve.
100%. And as the saying goes, you can only give to other people what you're willing to give to yourself. So you're actually playing small when you hold back on whatever it is that you need. And there are people that come in, they might say, I feel like I look tired. I need to treat these frown lines. I don't want to look angry. But actually, I really like my smile lines. I think that's a sign of a life well lived. Whereas other patients might be like, no, load me up. I don't want to see a thing. But it's whatever floats your boat, right?
Oh my gosh, this is so funny. I never really thought about it in those terms because, certainly like I've thought about different aesthetic things. I'm getting better about massages and stuff
Oh
like that.
yeah,
I really have
that's
to baby
great.
step it. I'm a traditional like military girl, right? Where it's really frivolous to do those kinds of things. I
Yeah.
do love me some lasers though.
Yeah.
Uh, I do love some lasers. So whether it's like I did laser hair removal back in the day, honestly, it was an efficiency thing because I was like, I'm deploying. I don't want to deal with
Yeah.
shaving, like,
Yeah.
right? But I got time back by doing
Right. Well,
that.
and
And
not being self-conscious. If you had dark hair in places that society tells us we shouldn't have it there. That's
right,
the
right.
bikini line. Yeah.
Well, and it's interesting that you say that because I had to go through this. Well, am I doing this because society really wants me to, or am I doing this because this is for me? And
Yeah.
really, it was a convenience thing in the beginning. Like, I was just like, I
Right.
just don't want to deal with it. But, over time, I'm like, man, this is pretty amazing. Like, when I think about
It
the
is.
amount of time that I've gotten back by like investing in these lasers, I also got laser eye surgery, which I know you don't do eye surgery stuff, right? But this is an aesthetic thing.
For sure.
And it's funny because I still remember I actually did it through the military. And our surgeon, they come into the briefing room where you get your pre-operational briefing. There's a bunch of us in there. And he was like, I'm here to make sure that when you're shooting your M4, you're on target, that there's no question that you can save the
Right.
lives that you were called to save, right? And I was like, wow, like that is a
Yeah.
purpose, to
That's
give.
right. Not wearing my glasses in the middle of battle.
Exactly. And so even though at the time those were practical things I did that supported my mission, when I
Yeah.
think about as a human being, like supporting myself, right? That's like one of the hardest things that we'll ever do is to your point, like if you want to exponentially grow your purpose, you have to love yourself the same way that you love other people.
You do.
And that is so massive. So can you expand a little bit more on like when did you come to that realization
Yeah.
of the
Well,
importance of
I
self-care?
Yeah, I can relate because a lot, not everybody, but many people that go into medicine, they're givers. You go into medicine because you want to help. And that's certainly, I knew I wanted to leave the world better than I left it and and help people and life in some way. And so I actually started out my first few years in the emergency department. And growing up in a family with a history of addiction and mental illness, it turns out that in that environment, I was doing for other people what I wished I could have done for the people that I loved and cared for. And that was not self-care for me. That was just, reliving very sad things for me. And I had always loved dermatology. I worked in dermatology before PA school. So I got a great job in dermatology and got more into skincare. And that was great because I could see all ages. I could see kids and adults and still do procedures, which I found fun, but not what I wanted to do all day long. And also, on a more lighthearted note, help people feel good about how they looked. I'm a woman and I'm not immune to not wanting to look cute. I think that's just, again, monkeys groom each other. Hello. So over time, as I said, seeing those CEOs and academics that really just wanted to feel better, I was like, oh, this is really what this is about. I can sign up for this because I can fight the good fight here all day long.
That's so good. So I'm curious, based on some of the history that you just shared.
Mhm.
So one thing that a lot of this community struggles with is they're in these service-oriented spaces, and there's like this element of suffering that maybe
Mm.
was taught to them as noble, right? So
That's right.
you just shared this beautiful part of your past of like, there was like stuff in my family tree, and I was doing this work trying to be of service because I'm a medical professional and that's what we do. And I realized I was just more in that cycle of that life draining bit that I didn't want to be a part of. And for my audience, it is very difficult for them when they come to that place of it's time to pivot, right?
Mm.
They have that thought on loop of like, no, but it's not noble to leave, right? These people
Yeah.
really need me. And,
Yeah.
but what I heard you say was you really pivoted from like, I did this thing. I'm really thankful I had that time, but I get more joy out of this portion of my career. So,
Yeah.
what had to happen for you internally to give yourself permission to let go of this part of your career to enter into this joyful part?
That's a great question because as a physician assistant, we don't get a residency like a medical student would. So I did look at my first few years in the emergency department to help serve that purpose with a broad education. I'm so glad I did it. And it was genuinely though very difficult for me and with my history to go to work every day and feel like the efforts couldn't be received for whatever reason. And they had nothing to do with me most of the time, but that was what I had been living. And so it was easier for me to give and feel like I was making an impact in a different environment. And it's not that way for everybody, but that's how it was for me. And again, I have gotten to a place where in aesthetics, it's like I'm doing for my patients what I wish could have been done for my mother. I had never even come to that conclusion until recently, but it's a different way of healing. And as far as giving goes and it being noble, I totally get that. Despite my family history, everybody's very, very generous of heart. And I also think it's kind of a Southern quality too, to just, you've got to give no matter what, right? But the unfortunate part about that, if you don't find the balance to also give for yourself, is you're holding your potential back because you are living in other people's expectations. You're not living true to your own gifts, to your own ambition, to your own ability to show up fully in the world.
Oh my gosh, you're just, yes, all of the things. This is so good. Guys, when you don't give to yourself, you're holding your potential back. I know you've heard me say this a million times. Now you get to hear a medical professional tell you that you've got to start with your self-care, right? So thank you so much for that beautiful reminder. There was something else you said that I thought was just really, really beautiful, which is also a really big theme I see in these communities and just in the world as a whole, right? But
Mhm.
you started your medical career and you realized over time that to some degree, your efforts weren't being received,
Mhm.
right? So the impact that you wanted to have wasn't happening in a way that you wanted, but it wasn't from your lack of effort. It was
That's right.
because of the other individual's inability to receive. And
100%.
receiving is one of the biggest things that I talk to clients about that it's a muscle, a very atrophied muscle that they've never worked out. And so I'm like, we're going to go to that receiving gym and
Yeah.
and it might start with something like a compliment, right? Like usually people who have imposter phenomenon experience a compliment and their immediate go-tos are like, oh no, it was a team effort, it wasn't me, even though you know damn well that it was primarily you, even if it was a team. Or there's other deflection, right? Like, oh well, I could have done this better. Like it's always very self-deprecating. And
Hmm.
so just a simple exercise of thank you. Even though deep down you're like cringing, you're like, oh my gosh, like that's your first day in the gym, right? Of learning how to receive these compliments. So, do you mind sharing from your medical perspective? Because I think this is a really great analogy for what my typical audience experiences. So, you as a medical professional want to be of service. What does it look like for the person sitting on the chair or the table to not receive? How does that feel for you? And what are you experiencing? And what is not happening with the patient to create that healing?
Oh, that's a great question. Whew. So what's not happening for them? Well, I think if they, again, going back to the expectation of perfection, that's probably unrealistic. And statistically, patients that have something called body dysmorphic disorder, which is, it might be related to somebody with an eating disorder that thinks they're fat when they're way too skinny. Or it might be somebody that is obsessed with every single line on their face and they think that every single thing has to look like a filter, which becomes more and more concerning these days with social media. But there's a 98% chance that I will not make them happy. 98% is what the data says. If I get one of those patients, my job is it's unlikely they will listen to me and go get help, but my job is to try to help refer them to somebody else that can, that's not in aesthetics. Might be a primary doctor, it might be a psychiatrist. It's usually a spin-off of kind of an OCD disorder. But that is where I start. Now that's in the most severe cases. That's in the most severe. A lot of these patients I can coach and it becomes more of a trust building type situation where it's like, look, here's the reality. We are going to help you look so much better. The likelihood that we're going to give you the illusion of a facelift at 70 years old and you've never had anything, it's low, but we're going to make you look and feel so much more rejuvenated and refreshed. And here's a good place to start. That's usually the way that my conversations go.
Oh my goodness, that's so good. Okay, so it almost sounds like there's different categories of folks, and based on your experience, you can probably sniff them out pretty quickly, right? So there's the person that walks in the door that you're like, this person is deep into their body dysmorphia. They're not in a place to be open to receiving.
Right.
They say they want to change, but they have chosen this body dysmorphia, right? It's a comfort on some level for
Mm-hmm.
them. And then there are the people that you're like, ooh, I think they're open, right? So maybe even like somebody listening to this episode right now who is a get shit done person, but they're like, oh, you know what? Like I'm open to this aesthetic conversation because yeah, I think maybe my outsides don't match my insides.
Yeah.
Then you can start to expand their horizons to what's possible using the research, right? And all the things. And then there's the person that willingly walks into your office because they see the value of aesthetics and
Yeah.
dermatology and all of those things. And those are the best kinds of clients, right? Because there's no convincing required. They just know this is another tool. I can use the tool or not use the tool. Is this going
Mhm.
to enhance my life? And I think bringing it back full circle to the question of like you pivoting from your original medical practice to where you are now, I think that's so fascinating because I was sort of in that point as well a few years ago of, working in justice spaces. Like there are incredible justice system professionals out there and government officials, but there is a certain frame of mind and thinking that gets very exhausting where I'm like, why do I have to convince you that like
Sure.
being victim centered is the most important thing you can do to support your investigation and being successful prosecutorially, right? Like
Right.
serving the survivor of the horrific crime is the
Mhm.
way to be successful. And they're like, no, it's all about the investigation. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I just can't, right? So
Right.
having to pivot away from that a lot of the time to work more with people that are like, yeah, I love having additional tools that I'm not aware of. Like, what else do I need to know about to create the life and career of thriving that I want? And so I love that you're so in tune with the people that walk through the door and you inherently know, hey, if this person is not in a space to receive this, that is not a me problem,
Mhm.
right? Because
Right.
oftentimes people who are of service take that on themselves. They think like, well, what did I do wrong, or what do I have to do to like get to
Right.
the person? And you just know from a lot of trial and error that nope, it's not a me thing. I'll make referrals to whatever professional they need, but when you're ready, English Black is here to
Yeah.
support you.
Yeah, because the flip side of this coin is if you are looking at it from a sense of it is about me, that's kind of feeding your own imposter syndrome-ish type stuff, right? Because if you, for in my position, if I've shown them the before and afters of my own patients that I think look nice, that's very objective information of what they can expect. And if we get them there, objectively speaking, because we show the before and afters so that you have the data. Everybody forgets what their baseline looks like. Everybody, because you look in your mirror every day. So it's so important to come back and see your own before and after so that you have that information of what you got out of your investment. And then if it's not great, your injector has the feedback and the objective information to make it right for you. And then it's adding on to the issue of imposter syndrome. I have struggled with that myself, even after 16 plus years of injecting, which is in some ways hilarious. But it comes from a place of if you're saving, if people's lives are on the line, you do have to have an element of perfectionism. And I'm not an element, right? That's
Right,
that
right.
that's the kind of direction you start in because there's so much writing on the decisions that you make. So that desire for excellence is not a bad thing. So yeah, it's the way that I look at the imposter syndrome is what more do I need to do to not feel this way? So at one point when I opened my own practice, I was like, well, I just need to relearn my anatomy more specifically so that I can name it. I know it, but labeling it in front of someone else I might be teaching it's a little gone. I'm getting older. I'm
Oh my gosh.
perimenopausal. So yeah, so I do some more reviewing and then I feel better. Then I'm doing it for myself.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. I wish, I need to install like confetti and balloons or something to come down when the guest makes insanely amazing points. Because you dropped a couple really great nuggets there. So first of all, you pointed out that, if you really turn the mirror around to yourself, if you're making it about you, right? So if you have a client coming in with that body dysmorphia and statistically 98% of the time they're not going to be happy by anything that you do,
Yep,
then you let the result go because your job is to do the best that you can. But if you're focused on that imposter phenomenon element of like, well, you didn't do good enough and you need to do better, and like, what could you have done to
yeah,
like
yeah,
convince that person, right? That is actually a function of your unhealthy
that's
ego,
right.
right?
That's right.
That
That's
part of
right.
you that needs that healing. And that's an indicator of like, oh, snap, like you're actually doing it for yourself, right? And I can relate to that. I saw some of that in myself when I was younger, where you do want to be of service. You think you actually are doing the best that you can to serve your community, but really it's feeding your own ego, right? Because you want that affirmation that you're worthy,
Right.
that you're good enough for the work,
Yeah.
and like you hit a certain level that you can't get past, right? And so on a personal level, that's where I burned my career down, is I could feel myself hitting that figurative glass ceiling and I didn't know how to get past it. And I didn't realize it was because it was my unhealthy ego that was like, but you did all these things for the community, like why aren't you
Yep.
experiencing all this other
Oh my
stuff,
gosh.
right?
Yeah. It's
Yeah.
just like in an unhealthy dating relationship, the person that's not calling you back, not being respectful, it's not so much of a two-way street. And yet, as givers, empaths, the desire is like, but I can just do it. But that's not the person to do it with. You're not going to get there, you know?
Exactly.
They're
Oh,
showing you
so
over and
true.
over and over again, right? Yeah.
So, so true. Yes. And so, as soon as, again, there comes that self care part where when you start to self care and talk to that unhealthy part of yourself and ask it, like, why are you so like desperate for that attention? Right. And then you can start to see who you're really meant to be, right? It's usually a value that you've ignored for a really long time that
Yeah.
is gotten louder over time. And it's saying, like, you need to pay attention. If you want to be the best version of yourself, there's a value deep down that you've been ignoring. And I think self-care is a very central one in this community that we struggle with. And, again, letting go of other people's expectations, offering your best gift. If people want to take it, great. If not,
Yeah.
okay. And,
Yeah.
you in your practice, it's the same thing. People can walk in your door or not.
That's right.
But
That's
you
right.
know that the people who do choose to walk in the door, it's because they're choosing to pick up this specific tool to improve their lives. Because when my outsides match my insides, I can show up to that board meeting confidently. I can show up in that room, not to impress anybody else, but just so
Yeah.
I can be me and just
Yeah.
shine my
For
own light.
yourself. It's for
Right.
yourself.
Oh,
Yeah.
I just get chills like talking about it
I
because
know.
this is something that we don't really consider. Like my typical client is really in this pit of like, society has told me I'm just not good enough. And it doesn't matter what I do or what I achieve. I mean, I've had like Harvard educated, Yale educated, like people who were at the top of their field. And so actually bringing it back to the solution that you mentioned, a little, you like dropped this nugget and I'm glad that we're coming back to it. But
Yeah.
offering other people the solution that we needed back in the
Yes.
day is
Right.
the vehicle. So when you feel like alone is an easy example, like help going to someone else and helping them feel less lonely, even though it feels very giving, you're actually healing through that interaction.
Oh,
And so
100%.
it sounds like for you with your mom having these predatory professionals exploiting the insecurity that she had,
Yeah.
it sounds like to a certain degree you're taking that history and reshaping it into something that is loving and helpful to the people that you're called to serve.
Oh, that's exactly right. That's exactly right. And I love it's the Dan Martell quote, your frequency is what you frequently see. And you if you want confident giving people in your life, you have to be a confident giving person. And you also have to believe in that worth. I read Worthy recently by Jamie Kern Lima, and I love how she talks about, confidence is gained really more from external validation, but that sense of self-worth is really something that you've got to cultivate on your own. And when we talk about self-care, for me, I have found that using different modalities of self-care. I mean, I was probably somebody's really good lap dog in my last life because I could be massaged like every week. I love a good massage. And I actually was reflecting over the weekend. I was like, wow, all these instances that I've thought I've been giving to myself, whether it's material things, a nice outfit or a massage or getting a pedicure or something like that. For me, developing and cultivating that self-worth has really become more of doing things like having difficult conversations I don't want to have, journaling about my worth and maybe where that came from and all of the different ways that that has come up in my life and how it keeps repeating itself in different dynamics in my life. Yeah, it's amazing. I love that book and how she wraps that up with a nice little bow around it.
Oh my gosh, all of her stuff is so amazing. I love it so much. And I love what you shared about, your next level of cultivating your self-worth includes having hard conversations. And
Yeah.
for you, it's journaling to identify the patterns, right? Around whatever like stuff that you're working through is when you identify those patterns, now you see the opportunities for the healing for yourself. So since you mentioned Jamie Kern Lima, I'm
Yeah.
gonna go here, but
Yeah.
are you a spiritual person?
Oh, of course I am. And I
Okay.
have been my whole life. Yeah.
I love it. So tell me, because spirituality is something that we talk about. Everybody defines it a little bit differently, right? And it's not religious, but the way I explain it is it's something that you know deep down is true, even though you don't have evidence to support that it's
Yeah.
true.
Yeah.
And so, spirituality is a really big element in healing this imposter phenomenon journey because when you're in your imposter, you're focusing on your own strength and your own energy to get
That's
things
right.
done.
Yeah.
And when we incorporate our spirituality into that life purpose, that's when magic really starts to happen.
That's
So
right.
I'm curious for you, like, how has your spiritual practice, how have you incorporated that into your business and life purpose? And how has it played a role in creating the amazingness that we're seeing today?
I love that you brought this up because as a young girl, in my early teens, being the thinker that I am, I read the Bible and I was in Bible studies all on my own. My parents weren't really around. This was when I look back and I'm like, it's so interesting how I got all that set up. But it really, really bothered me that, and I think that, again, I think that your military audience will appreciate this, is I could not understand how there could be a God, how there could be a higher power when there are children in the world that are maliciously harmed. And I was like, how can there be a loving God when things like that happen? And I struggled with it off and on just from my little home in Charlotte. And my mother-in-law and mental illness too. It's like you can see, okay, well, maybe their time on earth was done and they were needed in heaven. I'm going through my teenager conversation. But then with mental illness, it's like, what's the silver lining there? Everybody around them is suffering, watching them suffer, and they suffer. And how does that? But my mother-in-law actually helped me a lot, my rest her soul, and she just said, English in our church we say it's mystery. And it was just the right timing, and that's probably an incredibly unsatisfactory answer for a lot of listeners, but just saying that it was mystery was helpful, because there are things in my life, events and people that have shown up that there's no way it could have happened without a higher power. It's too coincidental, it's too weird and bizarre that things align the way that they have. And so the way that I do that on a daily basis is I thank God and Jesus. If I lose something and I find it all of a sudden, it might be something simple like that. Or thank God for the amazing practice, my patience, my success, and most importantly, the challenges, because there's no growth without those challenges. And only recently have I really been able to start looking at every challenge and every obstacle I've overcome as the training ground, as setting me up for success, not this terrible thing happening to me that is hard to understand, but I'm going to trust that there's a plan. It's like, no, this is part of the plan.
Oh my gosh, this is so amazing. And thank you so much for sharing a little bit about your journey. I Yeah, the spirituality, what you really got to in your beautiful explanation was there was an element of surrender that you had to engage in,
Mhm.
where you went from like, I'm trying to find all the answers, right? Because we're human, we have brains, we
Yeah.
want to understand why
Yeah.
things work the way that they work because we want to make sure that we're operating in a way to optimize success, right?
Yeah.
So if
Yeah.
there's this element of like, but there's so much in the world that's out of my control, how do I control that, right?
Yeah.
It'll drive you crazy.
It'll drive you crazy because if you want to be generous and giving, I was actually talking to a patient about this who has a hard time getting her Botox. She's very much a giver, and I was like, look, I think about this a lot, and we can all give and give and give. We can live like Jesus did. We can live as a poor person with nothing to give but our spirit. But where does that end? And how are you helping your children in this world? We live in a fallen world, so there's that. But when I went through this horrible divorce, horrible, and in my recovery from that, of finding myself again, every time I'd go to church alone, I would sit there and just sob. I mean, just cry throughout the whole thing, because the idea that I was going to trust that things were going to work out and I was letting go and I was going to trust that this being was going to take care of me was very overwhelming and scary. But I did it, and here I am. Or I do it
Yeah,
every day. It's like a daily thing, right?
no, it absolutely is. And so this is another tool for the toolbox, right? So we've talked about this new aesthetic tool that my clients are going to start picking up, right? So their outsides match their insides. We talked about healing the unhealthy ego parts that, are keeping you from your highest potential, like you so wisely shared. Now we're talking about this tool of surrender, which is the acknowledgement that there is something bigger out there at play, but it is your responsibility to figure out what does that interplay look like between me and that higher power. And when you're in the depths of the hard stuff, like it sucks. I mean, there's just no other way
No
to
fun.
say it's awful. Like you don't want your worst enemy to experience it, but you have this tiny part of you that says that this is awful, but one day you're going to see how either you grew from this or
Yeah.
maybe you might help heal other people through this experience, right? And it's not just about like platituding it away or being like, there's a silver lining to everything, but you have
No,
the wisdom of life and being knocked down enough times and then getting back up to know that's where the growth happens.
sure.
And
Your pain is
the
your power.
exactly, exactly. I mean, like this whole business was born out of that young me that was terrified that she wasn't good enough for the big life purpose that she had. And so I'm providing the solution that I needed back in the
Yeah,
day. But surrender is another really hard one because we're control freaks, right?
yeah, for sure, for sure.
So we like
Like,
things.
wait, who are you talking about here?
Oh, I know, right? And so it's funny because again, you're back at the gym doing those reps of
Yeah.
every day, right? And so maybe if somebody's listening to this and they're like, I know that English and Alani are right, that I need to start practicing my surrender. And what does that look like? You know, it might just look like intellectually saying, I don't know that I trust you, God, or higher power, or whatever you call it, but like I'm open, right? I'm
Yeah.
open to a different type of relationship. So I need you to maybe show me what I'm missing out on by not engaging in these spiritual practices. But for you, what did that look like getting out of the trench of, since you shared this very honest story of post-divorce struggle, how did you get back to that place of trusting God and surrendering yourself to future love or
A lot of tears, a lot of tears, meditation, and letting go, just the ultimate letting go, and attempting to read different resources, all kinds of therapy, which I've always been such a big fan of. You got to get a good one, but that can be such a great resource. But I'll tell you a funny story. In one of those therapy groups, I'm such a practical gal, practical pack, always solving problems. And I'm a great problem solver, right? It's part of that whole controlling thing, right? And somebody asked me once, they were like, well, so English, what do you do when you feel anxious or you're angry? I'm like, and at that point in my life, I think I was in my early 30s, newly married, and I was like, well, I clean. Because that was something I could control. I'd go clean because I could make something look better and be mad. So that's something I could do something about. And I thought that was very practical. And he's like, and then what do you do? What? He's like, then what do you do? Oh, I clean some more. Well, and then what do you do? And I was like, I don't know. And it had never even dawned on me that you would not take action if you had strong feelings. It was revelatory to know that sometimes you just need to sit still and feel your feelings. Revelatory. And that is especially uncomfortable if you have been through really, really intense hardship, because those pains are so painful, you don't want to feel them. But I'm telling you, the only way around it is through it. And it's not from a place of poor me. It's just like, dang, this sucks. It just sucks that this happened. And yet,
mm,
here are the wonderful things in my life that I have as a result or that have happened, and who knows where it's going to take me next. But being able to feel those feelings has just been like so eye-opening for me. And because it's so foreign, I would literally have to take half an hour and just go sit outside by myself, or it might be in the middle of a meditation. And for me, being squirrel brain, I guess you could use that term, monkey brain, where your brain's just ping ponging all the time. Getting a massage in my 20s was hard, just to lay still for an hour. But so it becomes a practice to be able to do it, especially if you're not a really more feely type of person.
totally. That's why they call it meditation practice, not meditation perfect,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
I so resonate with what you're saying. I tried to meditate when I was younger, and just like the yoga thing, I'd be like, it's not working. Like my brain's
Yeah.
all over the place, right?
Not
And then
solving the problem.
yeah.
Yeah.
And I ended up using Headspace, the app, for a
Yeah.
bit. And he has that soothing British voice.
Yeah.
And I remember him talking about this. Like he was like, that's normal. Like your brain is gonna go, but the practice is in bringing it back to the
Right.
present. And that
Right.
was such a light bulb moment of like, oh, like because I'm not doing it perfectly doesn't mean I'm doing it wrong. I just have to give myself the grace,
Yeah.
right? Which is another tool that we
Yep.
don't really use on ourselves very well. But that is so good. in terms of like the tears and sitting in it, which again is not something that people really want to hear. But I agree with you that it is one of the most powerful things you can do, because we all know, right? If you're listening to this, you're the kind of person, you do things the right way. And we know deep down that even though you don't want to go through it, you have to go through it. You have to give your body the time and space to process
Totally.
whatever it is fully.
Yep.
And I know for me, after I've been professionally employed, like myself, self-employed for over 3 years at this point. And so when I left my last W-2 job, I was in a pit for a hot, like
Oh,
a year and a half, 2 years of same thing, where I'd be in the shower just like spontaneously burst out crying. And I'm like, what's happening to me? But I
mm,
knew that my body was like, we have to do this because you went through some really hard stuff and you're in the pit,
mhm.
but you're going to get out of the pit. But for now, this is the way through, right? And if you're in that pit today, I just want you guys to know there's joy on the other side of it when you do that healing work. And then you can partner with amazing people like English to have your outsides reflect your insides appropriately. So unfortunately we are out of time. I could talk to you forever, English. This was so incredible. Where can people find you?
Yeah, so I'm on Instagram at the English Aesthetic. And if you want my top 3 treatments to look refreshed and not done, the curated glow guide, you can DM me curate. Or if you're an injector business owner, DM me grow for my Google Sheets behind the glow, building a 7-figure business without losing yourself.
Oh my gosh, guys, go check out her resources and tools. I am so honored we got to have English on the show today. Thank you, thank you, thank you, English, for your time. And guys, if you'd like any additional resources, as always, you can go to www.mightysparrowcoaching.com for my life purpose exercise freebie or my values prompts. There are video guides to help you through the entire process. You can also check out my best-selling book, The Least of Us: How Your Imposter Syndrome Points to Your Greatest Power, available at all major book retailers. So until next time, humble warriors, please remember the world needs who you are made to be, inside and out. Thank you for joining us today on this journey to discover how you can harness your imposter to work for you.
Thanks so much for.
If you enjoyed this episode and would like some help overcoming your imposter syndrome, check out the free life purpose exercise on my website and subscribe to my blog. If you already know what your life purpose is and are ready to crush or harness your imposter syndrome, then you're going to love my best-selling book, The Least of Us: How Your Weakness Points to Your Greatest Power, available on Amazon and all major book retailers. Or you can hit me up at alani@mightysparrowcoaching.com to discuss private coaching or corporate and government training. That's ALANI@mightysparrowcoaching.com. Listen, there's only ever been one you, and there will only ever be one you. And you have a specific gift to give that the world desperately needs. Don't let your self-doubt be the thing preventing you from living your most joyful and impactful life. Until next time, I'm always cheering you on.